Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us at the World Stem Cell Summit. My name is Dylan Livingston, and I am the founder and president of the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives. A4LI is a 501c4 nonprofit advocating for social and political change to advance the longevity biotech sector. In this session, I will be joined by three key stakeholders in the field to discuss what the longevity sector is doing actively to combat aging and age-related disease. Sonia, let's start with you. Can you briefly introduce yourself and discuss what you do relating to longevity medicine?
So I'm Sonia Erson. I spend most of my time investing in longevity companies. I'm on the board, I'm chairperson of the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives and on the board of the Foresight Institute, both organizations super focused on longevity issues. Really happy to be here today.
Nir, you're up next. Can you briefly introduce yourself to our audience?
My name is Nir Barzilai, and since I'm kind of old, I have lots of titles. And I want to say the titles not because I want to show off, but because I want you to understand where I am in this enlarging field of geroscience, okay? I'm an MD. I still see patients from time to time, but I'm really a geroscientist. And I'm running one of the biggest institutes in the world for biology of aging with 2 centers of excellence for biology of aging. I'm also the scientific director of the American Federation of Aging Research. I'm also in the executive committee of the Longevity Biotech Association. I'm also one of the founder of the soon-to-be Longevity Medical Society. And what really I kind of demonstrate that the field is very much growing, and we're moving from biology to biotech to clinic. And that's why it's so exciting to be here with you today.
Thank you, Nir. Joshua, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Dr. Joshua Hare. I'm a practicing cardiologist and professor of medicine at the University of Miami. I hold the Lewis Lemberg Chair in medicine at the University of Miami, and I'm a co-founder of the biotechnology company Longevron Incorporated, which is a company dedicated to regenerative medicine approaches and cell-based therapy approaches in the area of aging disorders and diseases.
Great. Now I'd like to take a minute to talk about what inspired everyone to get involved with this field, and specifically any scientific figures who may have particularly inspired you. Let's start with Joshua. Joshua, can you explain why you got involved with regenerative medicine?
I'm an early adopter of working with cell-based therapy, and I'm a cardiologist and heart transplant specialist. Over 20 years ago, I was very interested in the problem of donor shortage for heart failure victims. Heart failure is the #1 medical problem in the United States, if you will. It's the #1 reason for admission to the hospital after normal childbirth. So it's the #1 medical disease. There are about it's estimated there are about 60,000 people who need a heart transplant, and we only are doing between 2,000 and 2,500. So there's a huge gap. So 20 plus years ago, my field got very interested in alternative approaches. And amongst those approaches are mechanical pumps on the one hand. On the other hand is a biological solution. Are there cells we can inject into the heart that could repair it or make that heart failure patient not need a heart transplant, or at least put the heart transplant off for a number of years? The more time the patient has with their own heart, the better. So we started to work with a variety of cell types. One of those cell types was called a mesenchymal stromal cell, or a medicinal signaling cell, a cell that's found throughout the body. And we did a ton of work and started trials. I was one of the earliest adopters of this research approach, and I did a very early trial in heart attack victims that began in 2004. So this is quite some time ago. And we were using these cells and getting very interesting results. that led me to believe subsequently that they could use for many other diseases. I moved to Miami, where I started a stem cell institute that's interdisciplinary, devoted to looking for cell therapy and regenerative approaches across the disease spectrum. And one of the insights that we had was that maybe this could help people with aging frailty and Alzheimer's disease, because there's a lot of complicated science here of how we got from heart failure to these other disorders. But one of the things that's critical in heart failure is people have exercise limitation and they don't feel well. And that's the same as in frailty. People with aging frailty is characterized by diminished exercise capacity. And we started to think, there's also overlaps in the biochemistry, the biochemical changes in the body between heart failure and aging. So about 10 years ago, we came up with the idea to do a rigorous clinical trial. We were doing a lot of clinical trials in heart failure and other diseases, lung diseases. So we said, let's do a trial in using allogeneic mesenchymal stem cells, or allogeneic, what are now medicinal signaling cells, or MSCs, and in people with early stage aging frailty. Older people, the average age of the people was 75 to 78 in those early studies. And we found evidence that giving an infusion of MSCs to people with aging frailty resulted in an increased 6-minute walk distance. The people could walk more, and depressed walking is a hallmark of aging frailty, also of heart failure. So we now saw in heart failure and aging frailty an improvement in 6-minute walk distance. And the 6-minute walk distance improvement in the frailty was substantial and significant. So that was one of the reasons why Longeveron was formed, and took a license from the University of Miami to continue work for cell-based therapy in aging frailty. And that's where we are now, if you fast forward. A very important person who influenced me was Dr. Linda Fried.
Mm-hmm.
She's now the Dean of Public Health at Columbia University. She and I were both at Johns Hopkins at the same time in around 2000, 2001. And I learned from her about the biology of aging frailty. I was fascinated because I was a cardiologist focused on heart failure. I was well aware that heart failure increased in incidence dramatically with age, but she really taught me, and I began to understand this overlap between heart failure and aging. And I actually went on to become a Beeson scholar and my project was to study a pathway in the aging heart. So my interest in aging and cardiology began to overlap as I was influenced by Linda Fried.
Great, thank you. Nir, can you tell us what inspired you to pursue aging research?
Kids usually don't look at their grandparents and say, oh, that's where we're going. They don't know how they got here. They think they're looking somehow weird. And I think this is what we kind of all think. And I didn't think that way ever through all my development as a high school student, as a medic, as a doctor. I thought, are you kidding me? I don't care who has cholesterol. I know who has high cholesterol. Those that are older have higher cholesterol. But what is this biology of aging? And can we do something about it? And I think from an historical perspective, the answer is absolutely yes. And I think when I got in this field, and I was one probably of the first, there were a dozen of us, then the big story was that people like Tom Johnson and Cynthia Kenyon and Gary Rufkin have shown that you can mutate one gene in a simple animal like a nematode, and they would live several times longer. One gene could control longevity. And this kind of gave a hope to the field that actually went from this hope to promise. And now we're talking about realizing this promise.
Thank you, Nir. And Sonia, is there anyone who got you involved in or interested in the longevity field? Who were those figures?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of inspiring people in the longevity field, and some of them have been there longer than others. But I think for me, when I first got interested in longevity issues, I had discovered this amazing scientist at UCSF named Cynthia Kenyon, Dr. Cynthia Kenyon, and she was really one of the first people who showed that her work showed that aging is plastic, meaning, for the longest time, we all thought that you're born, you age, you die. That's it. There's nothing you can do about it. Aging is set in stone. But it turns out there is something you can do about it. And she did something in the lab with her C. elegans worms. She did a few tweaks to their genes, their DAF genes, and managed to make them live 6 times longer than they would have lived otherwise. But not just longer. Healthier. They were. They had a Healthspan extension. They were energetic little worms, and and much healthier. And so that bit of research was super inspiring to me. And when I saw that, it really blew me away. And then I wound up meeting her and going to her lab and learning more about her research. And of course, I think she was an inspiration to a lot of people. I know that, of course, Calico, when Google's Calico started, they snapped her up and hired her, and she's been working there since they started. But she really did a lot of the seminal research using gene therapy to manipulate aging. And then there's also, I think the other scientist that really inspired me personally was Dr. Anthony Atala at the Wake Forest Institute of Regenerative Medicine. And instead of doing, like Cynthia was doing sort of full body slowing aging. And, it's funny because in the science field, there's sort of this, I see when I look at different techniques to combat aging and to extend health span, I see 2 different theories. There's like sort of the whole body thing, like gene therapy or small molecule or something to influence the entire body and slow down aging. And then there's the other side, which is sort of has this repair therapy idea. And Anthony's more on the repair therapy in that camp, where he's literally regrowing organs and regenerating pieces of tissue in order to make humans healthier for longer periods of time. And so, there's this amazing video, I think it's a TED Talk, where one of the first patients human patients that Anthony ever worked on is this young man who got a new bladder grown for him. And he had a spina bifida, and the bladder it has issues. And they literally took some of this kid's tissue and grew a brand new bladder out of his own cells in the lab, and then placed it in him, and really did change his life. They repaired him. And the TED Talk, if you look it up, is just amazing because he's so grateful, and it really, really changed his life. And wow, can you imagine if we could, and of course, Dr. Atala's lab is working on literally regrowing almost everything. I don't know if they're working on the brain, but there are other scientists now working on the brain who I've met, and they're equally as inspiring. So there's a lot of super inspiring people out there, but those Anthony Atala and Cynthia Kenyon were the 2 that really many years ago piqued my interest in this field.
Great. Let's start with Nir for this next question. Everybody here believes that regenerative medicine and longevity therapies will allow us to tackle aging and live in better health for longer. Nir, can you discuss the scientific breakthroughs over the past 20 years that gave you the most hope? What were your aha moments?
So the geroscience have developed in a way that I would say we have 3 projects that we're working on at the same time, although their conclusion will be maybe many years or even decades apart. The first one is Dorian Gray. Okay, Dorian Gray stopped aging when he looked at the mirror or at the Zoom like I do. It looks like it's chronological age, but I know that I'm much younger. Try it. But those are things that we can start doing now in order to just delay aging, target it and delay it. We can do a variety of things now. It's kind of ready to go. This is the decade that we have to do it. The second scenario is what I call the Wolverine or the fountains of youth. Take an old person, put him in a bath, take him out, and he's young. Okay, this is really, really difficult. It's not only rejuvenation like Dorian Gray, it's probably regeneration also. Your organs are already old, some are really failing. You have to kind of do replacement as part of that. By the way, it's not always that. For example, the use of senolytic, those are things that takes those zombie cells that we have and take them away, also make us healthier, even though we don't live longer, not we, animals so far. Even if they don't live longer, they're younger. So there are several ways that we could do that. But of course, the most important thing is the Peter Pan scenario. That is, take us when we're your age, Dylan, or we're in 20 or 30, and do some treatment that will erase aging every time. And then we can really slow aging so significantly and not get into this terrible age-related disease, their treatments, their combination, their everything that makes quality of life so much worse. So we're making progress in all of those areas.
Great, thank you, Nir. Sonia, what about you? What were your aha moments?
As somebody living in Silicon Valley, one of the big aha moments for me was when the first draft of the human genome was sequenced in the year 2000, and that was just epic, particularly because I'm in Silicon Valley and we're all about code down here, right? And so now we saw this and we're like, wow, well, now we have access to the human code. And it's now biology is an engineering project. It's not just sort of this sort of black box thing. I mean, some people argue that's still sort of a black box thing, but we have a code. And once the ACT and G of DNA. And once you have a code, what do you do? What do you do once you can read the code? The next step is to write the code. And that's super exciting, right? And so everybody here where I live in California got really, really excited that the genome had been sequenced, and it was something that at some point they might get their hands on and start to try to manipulate and for the better and improve human health. And of course, it's taken a long time. That was 2000. Here we are in 2022. And I remember in the year 2010, the New York Times had this article where they're like, oh, it's been a decade since the human genome was sequenced and nothing has happened. And that must mean that the human genome doesn't matter. And I just remember reading that and going, are you kidding me? This is the most ridiculous article I've ever read. And the reason why nothing had happened, or why they thought nothing had happened, things had been happening, of course, but why they thought there hadn't been enough of an impact on society in 10 years is because it was really, really expensive. Like it was like what, $2.7 billion or something to sequence the first draft of the human genome. And then it was like 1 million, and then it was 100,000, and then it was, like 10,000. And eventually it got down to $1,000. And I think you can do it for a little cheaper than that. But not too much, but it's going to get cheaper and cheaper over time. And the cheaper it gets, now that we're under sub 1,000, then that allows more people to read the code. And it was sort of like prohibitively expensive to read the code before, at least enough code so that you can do something with it, right? And so that's why nothing happened right away and immediately, but things are changing now. And we're now at that point where a lot more people can have access to a lot more codes and a lot more is being done. And that's super exciting.
Let's talk about, let's move on to our next topic here. Let's talk about things that are currently in development, things we should be excited about. So let's start with Nir again. Nir, can you shed some light on some technologies that are in development right now and close to market that we should be keeping an eye on, and why do you think they'll be so impactful, Nir?
So Dylan, before that, I just want to, and I try to clarify that there are two terms that sometimes we're using without understanding them. Rejuvenation is taking something and making it younger. Okay. Regeneration is about regeneration of new cells. Senolytics don't do it. Metformin doesn't do it. Okay. So I just for the discussion now, Joshua is doing regeneration. Okay, so that's really good. So I'm just telling you that so that, and I used the terms independently before. I don't know if you noticed, but for you to notice. Okay. So this is what we have noticed when it comes to regeneration. This is some of the things that we noticed. First of all, you can take a sperm of a 90-year-old man and an egg of a 50-year-old woman and fertilize them, okay? And we can actually measure the age of the sperm and the egg. But when we start after fertilization, this thing that's called the blastocytes is formed. It's really regeneration, a whole human being, okay? And when that happens, the age of the sperm and the egg are totally erased from our DNA. We always start at zero. And I think keep it as something, this is so excited because we figured out how to do it in this case. So we should figure out how to do it for our organs or cells or whole body in some ways. The second thing is a paper, quite recent paper by David Sinclair, where he basically crushed an optic nerve, the nerve to the eye, and with a cocktail of rejuvenating factors, he actually regenerated this optic nerve that was kind of dead. So you can take an old nerve and regenerate it so it's kind of young again. This is a proof of concept. It's nowhere near, okay, we can do it everywhere, but those are examples that we can do it. There are even other examples. For one, women who are lactating, the fat around the adipose cell, the fat around their gland is actually melting away and turns into another cell that's called fibroblast. And when they end lactating, those fibroblasts return then to be fat cells. Sometimes it goes wrong and they become kind of muscle cells or something else. But there are lots of examples where we can go from one form of cell to another form of cell and back, which means there's a potential of reprogramming, regenerating things in our body, which we would use in order to get huge impact on our health.
Sonia, how about you? As an investor, what do you think we should be watching for in the short term?
Well, there's a lot of technologies to be excited about right now. Wow, I almost don't know where to start on that. As an investor, I see a lot of different things. One of the technologies that impacts the longevity industry quite a bit is artificial intelligence. And, most people probably don't really think of that as a longevity technology, but it helps a lot. And advances in artificial intelligence have really helped longevity companies because a lot of the things that they're doing is pattern matching or sifting through the data and looking for patterns, machine learning. And so because AI has advanced, the longevity agenda has advanced. So that's one thing. There's a lot of a lot of other technologies to be excited about right now. I mean, the gene therapy is really starting to take off. I have two companies in my portfolio that they're working on gene therapies for different health purposes. One of them is using a gene therapy to clear out plaques in arteries. Wouldn't that be wonderful, right? And then you could actually repair some of the damage that's being done to your heart rather than just taking drugs to manage it. So then if I think of some of the other companies that I've invested in or companies that I know of, there's better diagnostics now. I mean, just if you go down to the really low hanging fruit, like a company like Prenuvo that can do a full body scan. And you could do that every year. And then you have your baseline and every year you go and see if anything's changing. And they can tell you, I had a couple of friends who went in and did and found things they weren't expecting to find. And that's kind of, it's sort of Star Trek like, right? Like this is future medicine that's actually available now. Or like Grail, the blood biopsy company, where you can get a blood test and be informed whether or not there's any cancer circulating in your body. That's a future kind of tech that's available now. And it's sort of on the expensive side, but it will come down over time. And so, those are things to be excited about. And then on the longer term horizon, I mean, one of the things that's been in the news a lot lately, because a lot of money went to it from Jeff Bezos and Yuri Milner, is this idea of cellular reprogramming, right? The idea of that you might be able to sort of turn back time on cells and get them to revert to a slightly younger state without reverting all the way back and erasing their memory, and because that would be very bad, and you don't want to get cancer either. But this idea of cellular reprogramming is super exciting. Senolytics to clear out old cells. I mean, there's so many different branches of longevity technology, and so many smart people working on this that is super exciting.
Thank you, Sonia. And Joshua, as someone in the industry, what technologies do you think we should be watching?
We're at a very exciting time scientifically because Longeveron has completed two very exciting clinical trials. One was to do a 148 patient placebo-controlled randomized double-blind study, multi-dose study of Longeveron's product, which is called Lomecel-B, which is a bone marrow-derived allogeneic cell product in people with mild to moderate aging frailty. And the results there, which are not published yet, are very encouraging regarding the 6-minute walk test. We've also done a study of Alzheimer's disease. And the Alzheimer's disease is very exciting. In Alzheimer's disease, we predicted that the Lomecel-B infusion would be safe. First of all, safety is very important in Alzheimer's. Some of the newer drugs, like Aduhelm, cause a condition called ARIA, or Alzheimer's-related imaging abnormality. They cause brain edema that can be dangerous. So we did a study that's published in the journal Alzheimer's and Dementia that had two objectives. One of the objectives was to look at safety, and the other was to get early provisional evidence of efficacy. The hypothesis is based around the idea that Alzheimer's progresses or is caused, at least in part, by neuroinflammation. And one of the things that Lomecel-B could do is reset and reorient the immune system in the body effectively. So the idea was, can we give Lomecel-B by intravenous infusion safely to people with Alzheimer's disease? And is there any suggestion of efficacy? Of course, we wouldn't consider it conclusive, but it would warrant further study. So we did find in a 33-patient placebo-controlled study that there was detectable improvement in cognitive function, at least some of the measures of cognitive function relative to a placebo group. The placebo group in the Alzheimer's study had dramatic decline over 6 months, and this was slowed dramatically by Lomecel-B infusion. So as a result of those findings, Longeveron is presently doing a phase 2 study of Lomecel-B for Alzheimer's.
Thank you, Joshua. Now let's go on to our next topic. Let's change direction a little bit. Let's talk about the government. So Sonia, I'll start with you for this first one. What are some of the major governmental milestones that we've seen over the past couple decades to help extend healthy human lifespan? Can you talk about specific policies that you consider steps in the right direction for the longevity industry? And what do you think the government should be doing moving forward?
Well, I think the government is starting to recognize the value of aging research. There's not a lot of money available through the NIA for researchers who are working on aging, but I feel like we're at a point where that might change, particularly if the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives helps work with politicians to change that. But I can even see in the NIA they're reaching out to VCs like me to help connect themselves with various companies that are working in the aging space. So I think that's a positive step that the government's doing right now. Let's see. And then, a lot of I think one of the silver linings of COVID is that it really forced government to focus on biotech and focus on aging immune systems, and realizing that the reality is that as you get older, your immune system doesn't function as well. Old age is a risk factor for disease, all sorts of diseases, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, of course. So I think the government is starting to focus more on that, and many of the companies that they funded during COVID, I think will actually, ironically, benefit the aging space, which is good news.
Great, thank you for that, Sonia. Nir, I'm going to pass it over to you. What are some things the government has done, in the past 20 years to support this field, and can you give us any insights on to what they should be doing based on what they have been doing?
I have a grim view of this question, because you asked me to say what the government has been doing, and I would say very little, certainly not enough. And considering the potential, it's really a very sad story. Look, the people over 65 are the people who are sick the most. Most of the healthcare goes to them. And we have national institutes of health, okay, including the National Institute for Aging, that pretty much got like 2-3% of the budget, okay? If there's no belief and nobody is looking around and understanding that aging can be prevented, okay, then it looks terrifying that that's the budget that we have. And in fact, it's the National Institute of Health. No, it's National Institute of Diseases. There's National Cancer Institute, a National Diabetes and Kidney Disease, a National Heart and Lung Institute. The only one that deals with health is the National Institute of Aging, and that's low on budget. Now, it takes time for people to realize that we actually went from hope to promise, but this is too slow. And I don't think that it's right to be slow at this time and age when the promises are great. And by the way, the promises are not only for the individual, okay, to be healthy. And by the way, die without diseases, basically, which is kind of the models that we're looking at, being healthy, and dying with very less mortality. But the economical benefit of such a thing are immense. We can solve huge problems like global warming with 10% of what we're going to save on healthcare if we'll just go and realize it. So unfortunately, the government hasn't done enough. And really, that's the moonshot that we have. And I'll tell you a story. I was at the Vatican when Joe Biden was a vice president, and he gave a talk about the moonshot for cancer, which we were saying for 50 years, 60 years will cure and prevent cancer, and we made some progress, but we didn't reach the goal. And cancer is so difficult because every cancer has a genome that is different from your own genome and from other cancers, the same kind of cancer in everybody else. It's a huge project, okay? And so he's talking like that, and the Pope comes up and say, still, I understand it's a big issue, personalized medicine, high cost, but I hope that one day there'll be a pill that is very cheap and will cure all cancers to all the people in the world, okay? So then I get up and I said, well, I have a pill that is very cheap, okay, one of the cheapest in the market, and it doesn't cure cancer, but it prevents cancer. And in fact, it happens to prevent other age-related diseases, okay? and I kind of made that. And for me, I won the debate here, but again, you have to hear it several times and understand that and get into it in order to say, you know what, that makes much more sense to prevent the cancer than to treat it. I want to say something. I want to say something else. You'll put it whenever.
Sure.
I've been leading a project that's called TAME, Targeting Aging with Metformin, which is this drug that delays variety of age-related disease and mortality in humans. Was shown in many, many clinical studies and other studies. And we use this drug metformin as a tool where we geroscientists went to the FDA and said, we want to do a study to show you that one drug delays all age-related diseases because we target aging and we take all those diseases away. We don't care what our subjects will have, but we're going to push the disease away. They're not going to get it in 5 years that we're going to watch them. And the FDA is open for that. They don't think that this is aging because they haven't heard about that before. They think it happened, God created this drug that has 8 other things that it's doing, and that's why it's working. But we know that it's not like that. There are other drugs that are doing that. And as long as we have this study and this template, we can get much faster with the FDA.
Great. Thank you, Nir. Joshua, I'm going to pass it to you. What are your thoughts? What has the government been doing and what can they do?
There's a whole Office of Aging Affairs in the Senate. The US Congress, the country's run by older people in general. So the health of the older people of this country is a major, major economic and health issue, because what happens there's a very important concept that the audience should know, which is the concept of health span, right? So over the last 150 years, human lifespan has doubled from on average 40 to on average 80. Which is amazing. That's a doubling. It's estimated that that increase in longevity is going to continue throughout this century. Now, one of the problems with that is that there's a period of poor health span at the end of our lives. Typically, it's pretty common around the world that the last period of your life is by and large a period of poor health and disability. Now, the paradox is that as longevity has increased, lifespan, so has the period of poor health span. So in the United States, it's estimated to be between 10 and 12 years. So what that means is as we're getting longer, we're getting sicker at the end of our lives. So that's a very important target for the country in terms of the healthcare system, but also in terms of economics, because if people are older and less able to work, they require more economic support. So there are incredible estimates of how much it would save the society if we could reduce the period of poor health span by 1 to 2 years. It's like in the trillions. Okay, it's an incredible amount of money it would save to reduce that period of poor health span. So it's a huge issue. The government is very interested in it, obviously from an economic and a healthcare standpoint. And in terms of funding research, there is a National Institutes of aging. There's an entire institute at the NIH devoted to this. And one of the very important concepts that has come out of the last decade or so is the concept of geroscience. It's another very important concept that the audience should know. Geroscience is devoted to the idea that if we treat aging, we're going to make an impact on all of health, because aging is the number one risk factor for all of diseases. So there's funding. Now, in anything, there's always more funding is always going to produce a better result. We see that with COVID. When the government devoted $10 billion of medical research, we were able to come up with a vaccine and a few other treatments in under 1 year. It's remarkable. So if you throw money at, our healthcare research engine in this country is immense, and with the right resources, we're capable of doing miraculous things. I consider the development of the COVID vaccine in 9 months one of the greatest accomplishments of medical science ever. It not only took a novel technology with a previously unknown virus and would go from phase 1 to phase 3 in 9 months and get approval. It's crazy, right? So unfortunately, there's just many competing things, and the government can't put $10 billion per year into every area of disease. So research in other areas percolates on more slowly. Now, the government is throwing a lot of money at Alzheimer's, and the Alzheimer's is administered through the National Institutes of Aging, and the increased funding to the National Institutes of Aging is heavily driven by money that's earmarked for Alzheimer's. And the pay line for Alzheimer's disease grants is more favorable than for other grants. But I would say the two main things of interest that the NIA funds is Alzheimer's and aging frailty research, or geroscience research. Longeveron was the beneficiary of a very generous grant from the NIA. It was a small business grant, and it helped fund the phase 2 study that Longeveron did, and helped advance that research and get the result that Longeveron presently has. As anything, more money is going to get more results quicker.
Great. Thank you so much, Joshua. Sonia, let's turn back to you for this next question here. Societally, when do you think people are going to have the same mindset that we on this panel do? This longevity mindset that aging is something that is malleable and worth reversing.
That's a good question. I don't think it will be long, because like I mentioned earlier, there's all these new diagnostics, like the body scans at Pre-Nouveau and the blood biopsies at Grail, where, when people start to have experiences where they can go in, get a blood test, and maybe I have some kind of cancer, and it knows and the blood test knows exactly what organ the cancer is in, and you can go nip it in the bud before it goes anywhere else. And you had cancer, then you didn't have cancer, and it's quick because you caught it so early, and much easier to deal with. And the more stories there are like that, I think the more people will start to look at that and go, wow, so what else can technology do for us? How else can technology be used to extend our lives and fight disease and prolong health, rather than, and of course, if there's a blockbuster drug of some sort, like if the company that I mentioned is super successful in figuring out how to clear plaque out of people's arteries, that would just really radically change medicine and the mindset. Think of, especially particularly if one of these breakthroughs comes in a big thing, like a big disease like heart disease, because heart disease is the #1 killer in this country, and that would certainly impact a lot of people.
Sonia, thank you for that. How about you, Nir? When do you think we'll see a change in mindset? When will lay people start believing that aging is truly malleable?
So I have an answer for that, because I've been asking my colleagues who've been doing studies for a long time, and the answer is simple. Statistically, it's 17 years. It's 17 years since you have an idea and you push it and you do this, everybody accepts that. That's the average time. Now, it depends when you start to count the years. I think we're 5 years down the road. I think, Bill Gates said, I totally overestimated what we could do in 2 years, and I'm probably going to underestimate what we're going to do in the next 10 years. So I think that's the issue. I want to talk about another issue, and that is whether we call aging a disease. And so from a biological perspective, for me, aging is the mother of all those diseases, okay? It pushes those diseases. Without the biology of aging, they don't come out. You can have gene ApoE4, it's gene for Alzheimer's, that you most certainly will be demented at 70 and dead at 80, okay? But it doesn't happen. You're not born demented, and you're not demented when you're 10 or 40 or 50. It takes those 60, 70 years to get the disease. You need the aging to get these diseases. So it is the mother, aging is the mother of all diseases. But I'm against calling aging a disease. Look, we just came out of COVID, where we took the elderly and we said, oh, you're different. We're going to stick you in prisons or in islands. We're going to make you lonely. That's where we want you to be. The elderly don't want to be called sick, and not all of them are sick. The AARP, okay, organization that we need with us, they don't want to call aging a disease. The FDA doesn't want to call aging a disease. The American Federation of Aging Research, okay. So we're in a situation where the people we want to help don't like the concept. And as I showed with the FDA will say, oh, you can change the onset of age-related disease. We'll give you indication. We don't have to name names, okay? Now, it's not that maybe eventually we shouldn't do it or we'll need to do it, but we need our people with us.
Thank you, Nir. And Joshua, when do you think the majority of people will acknowledge that we can potentially combat aging? Do you have a rough estimate, rough timeline in your head?
Well, it's getting more and more mainstream. I mean, there are prominent scientists who are written about in the New York Times frequently. My co-panelist, Dr. Barzilai, is well known for his work with metformin. David Sinclair has written a book called Lifespan. I have it right here. Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. I gave a TED talk last week entitled Living Healthy to 120. I think people are catching on, and people who are 70 and healthy and doing all the things they want to be doing are very mindful that they want to be able to be continuing that when they're 80 or 90. So I know a lot of people who are healthy and want to stay healthy. So I think everybody does know that as we age, we are at increased risk every decade that ticks by for poor health outcomes. And what we now know from the geroscience paradigm is that age itself is the risk factor for heart disease, for cancer, for Alzheimer's, for lots of bad things. We know that life is finite and it's going to end at some point, but the question is becoming, and everybody has to recognize that health span issue is, if you're going to live another 10 years, you want it to be good, right? Not you know, what's the point of living another 10 years if you can't get out of bed for that 10 years? So I think the idea is becoming really, really mainstream. I think people are reading about it in the New York Times and other newspapers, their books, their TV shows, and it's going to become a pervasive thing.
Great. Thank you, Joshua. All right. One final question for our panelists here, and we'll start with Sonia. Sonia, can you give us your thoughts and hopes for this field? What are the best ways to increase awareness and investment in this sector? And specifically, where do you see longevity biotech in 10 years from now, in 2032?
All right. Well, I have high hopes for this field, clearly. Otherwise, I wouldn't be investing in it. I believe in it, so I'm putting my money behind it, as are so many other people, not only in Silicon Valley, but around the country and indeed around the world. There's a lot of longevity investment coming from Europe as well now. So I'm co-investing with a lot of people from there. So, I have high hopes for it. I think a lot will happen in 10 years. It's always hard to predict how quickly things will happen and what field will take off and what one won't. And, so I don't think I would never try to make any of those kind of predictions, but I can say that I think within 10 years, we're going to see something that's so amazing that it really will, everybody will be on board with this agenda.
Thank you, Sonia. Joshua, would you care to share your thoughts here? What are your hopes for the future of this sector, and where do you see longevity biotech in 2032?
We have to have the support of the Food and Drug Administration. The Food and Drug Administration has not approved any drugs for an indication of aging. And however that's going to play out, it has to play out. We also need to think more broadly and have different approaches for aging. So two things need to happen. The FDA needs to give guidance on what types of aging-related indications they're going to improve. They have to tell the pharmaceutical and biotech industry if they're going to improve frailty or not. Is that an indication or not? Is sarcopenia an indication or not? Then I think on the biotech industry, we also have to look at different approaches, because biopharmaceuticals and big pharma is so oriented towards a precise druggable target, right? So in aging, everybody's looking for a pathway that's deranged that they can fix with a small molecule or a monoclonal antibody. Is it the mTOR pathway? I think that that's a little overambitious, because the way I look at it is aging is a diffuse process. Many things are going on, and you have to have a multifactorial approach. Right now, medicine has made a lot of success with hitting single targets. Heart failure is a great example. There are something like 8 approved pathways that you can inhibit now. So that means you're giving an older person with heart failure 8 different drugs. That creates a problem unto itself. We need to also take this opportunity to think out of the box and say, is there something simple we could do intermittently that's going to make a big difference? So that's why I'm drawn to the idea of cell-based therapy and cell infusions. One of the things I didn't mention is that the cell infusion lasts 9 to 12 months. So these are the couple of things. We have to be open-minded to new ideas scientifically, that maybe there's not one druggable target that we can find that's going to fix one thing and make a big difference. Right now there are a class of drugs called anti-senolytics. And they were tested for a single condition, osteoarthritis, and the trial didn't work. And that put a big damper on that field. And I think that's because there was too much traditional pharmacologic thinking applied to the problem of aging, which is diverse, and there's diverse biochemistry. So that's why I'm attracted to frailty with cell therapy, and I hope we'll get to do a phase 3 trial at Longeveron soon. And I hope we'll get to work with the FDA on guiding the design of that trial and reaching an approvable endpoint so that we can have something in the next 5 years, let's say. That's the way I see it. But you're absolutely right. There's got to be some societal changes. because there's got to be some governmental changes, and there's also got to be a broader thinking in the biopharmaceutical community as well.
Great, thank you. And Nir, we'll pass it to you to finish us off. Nir, what do you think we'll see in the longevity biotech industry by 2032? What changes? What are your hopes?
Well, that's why I'm active in many things, because we have to convince our colleagues, okay? And we need to convince the NIH, and we need to convince the industry, and we need to convince the pharmaceuticals. We need to convince the journalists, okay? And we need to do the lobbying. I think it takes a lot of people to do that. I realize that. I'm very frustrating that kind of the truth is out there and people are not getting on it the first time, but I realized it. And I know that people who are listening to this podcast and never heard about it before, they'll say, this is really interesting, but it'll take 2 more rounds before all of a sudden they'll say, just a minute, aging actually can be targeted. You know, why don't we do something more about it? And I would tell you there are millions and millions of people who are enthusiastic and are ready to help and are ready to contribute and doing philanthropies and other things. So there is a wave, but the wave, although got so big, it's a small wave compared to where we need to go.
Great, thank you, Nir. Thanks to Dr. Hare, Dr. Barzilai, and Sonia Arison, as well as the entire World Stem Cell Summit community for having us. And especially thank you to the audience for joining us today. I hope we have the chance to work with many of you moving forward on this important topic. So please feel free to reach out and, you know, let's make aging an option, right? Let's make aging optional.